Coffee is the foundation of life, the metaphorical oil to the machine that is the human being, a delicious and inexpensive saviour to an otherwise dreary existence. Okay, so that might be a little bit of a stretch, but I think we can all agree that a good cup of coffee is a great thing. It's a great thing to have out on the hill, it's a great thing to have at home, and there's nothing stopping you from making that great cup of coffee at home, pouring it into a flask and taking it out on the hills. It's something that we do quite often here, especially if you want to save a little bit of weight, a little bit of time. But this video focuses on those of you that might want that delicious fresh cup of coffee when you hit camp or when you're out in the middle of a walk like we are today. Something that's just that little bit fresher so you can enjoy the process and also have a great cup of coffee. It's very difficult to come up with a perfect brew method for everything. So this video is very much a guide. We're not going to say that this is absolute gospel. If you're looking for that, maybe check out someone like James Hoffman, who is a bit of a coffee guru on all of this. We will just be giving some very general instructions based on feedback that we've had, playing around with different coffees and different coffee brewers to get something that we think will make a good cup of coffee. It's then up to you to experiment a little bit because you may have different coffees to us, different brewing equipment. This is just a good base level so that we can get a good cup of coffee outdoors and really enjoy the experience. So before we get started on the actual brewing of coffee, a few different coffee methods, you have to consider the coffee that you're using first and foremost. So we've got to check in with Past Ben, where we're actually going to be visiting a supermarket so that we can show you the difference between coffees, because not all coffee is quite created equal. So we'll go back to Past Ben and we'll explain a little bit more. As you can see, we're in a supermarket right now. There is a good selection of coffee here. One thing you won't find a lot of this coffee though is any date of when it was roasted, so you've got no idea how fresh that coffee is, and oftentimes you'll either have it just in bean or in ground, and that ground is usually for cafetiere, so you don't really have control over the grind if you do want to go for a pre-ground. But all of this coffee that we've got here, no idea how fresh it is, so if you start with fresh coffee, you're going to have a better starting point for a good cup of coffee. That's the main reason that we've teamed up with our friends over at Black Mountain Roast, who are a local coffee roastery to us, based just outside the Black Mountains, just down the road from us. These guys are really fantastic. They've been great to work with and they've supplied us with all of the coffee for today's video, so we're really grateful to them for that. But these guys will make a bunch of different coffee blends. So I've got the breakfast blend in hand here, but we've got a whole different variety of coffees here that we're going to play around and test with today. They do that in both whole bean and ground, and a variety of different grind settings based on the type of coffee that you might be producing, whether that be in a Moka Pot, a cafetiere, pour over, or sort of an espresso grind if you are using them in a coffee machine or otherwise. But the advantage of going for a ground coffee from them is the vast majority of the work is done. You know, you've got a ground coffee that is ready to go from the off, and we've worked with the team at Black Mountain Roast to make sure we've got the right grind settings for the methods that we're going to talk about today. Obviously, with that in mind, the ground coffee is ready to go, but you might appreciate a different grind setting, and that's where the beans come into play. So we've got some beans hiding here somewhere. Can't remember where they are. We might not have any beans out, Harry. Why do we not have beans out? There's the beans coming into camera. So here we've got the beans in the espresso blend. Real advantage of the beans is that they will stay fresher for longer. So if you are wanting to grind your own coffee, you get slightly fresher coffee because it's unground. You can then grind it yourself to your desired setting. You can then play around with your own hand grinder, electric grinder, whatever you're using to grind your coffee, to make sure that you get the grind that you want for your desired brew method. So a little bit more flexibility with this. The other thing that is fantastic about Black Mountain Roast and smaller coffee roasteries really is that you know exactly when this coffee was roasted. So this coffee is extremely fresh by comparison to the stuff that we saw in supermarkets, who don't always put on roasted dates, or you might just see a best before, which doesn't give you a good indication of how long ago the coffee was brewed. Brewed? We haven't brewed it yet, we're roasting it. So the espresso blend here, for instance, was roasted on the 7th of June, 2-3. So at the time of filming this video, that was only a few days ago. This video might go out a little bit later, so timelines might be a little bit skewed, but this is only a few days old in terms of its roast. Same thing goes for a lot of these here. They are all roasted within quite a short time frame. So the coffee is really, really fresh, which is going to help massively with that flavour when we're brewing up with a few of our different methods. So our first method for brewing coffee outdoors, which is potentially a little bit more suitable for a few more of you, is the GSI Outdoors Moka Pot. So this is designed to essentially work with a two-stage process, as all Moka Pots do. Looks a little bit medieval, you know, with a little flap and everything going on. Essentially, this is a chamber in the bottom that you fill with hot water, and you've got a little basket in there above that with coffee in it, and there's a spout that runs up the middle. And the idea being that when you put this on a stovetop, you boil off that water in there, and then the pressure of the steam forces hot water through the coffee, and then coffee is brewed into the top chamber. You can then pour and drink a delicious coffee. This setup is the bigger one of GSI Outdoors range. So it is designed for more people. So you'll get 2 to 3 Americanos worth of coffee out of it, depending on your coffee size, or you'll get a few more sort of espresso worths of coffee out of it if that is your choosing. So this is going to produce slightly more liquid volume than some of our other methods. So effectively you can drink this as is. You can also still water it down to your taste with more boiled off water if you prefer a more mellow brew or you like a longer coffee. And talking of the coffee, along with our Moka Pot here, we will be using Black Mountain Roast breakfast blend. So when we were visiting Black Mountain Roast a few days ago, we got to play around with this coffee kit and decided that this was the best blend from their range for the Moka Pot, based on a few different taste tests. We drank quite a lot of coffee. But this breakfast blend has been pre-ground, so it's ready to go straight into the basket, and it's ground down to a medium fine grind. So really appropriate for a Moka Pot. You could also use something of this ground in potentially a cafetiere or a pour over. It is somewhat dependent on the flavour profile of the coffee and how strong a flavour you want, but the breakfast blend we found works really well in a Moka Pot. So we're going to be using this in combination with this to make some great coffee for you. To use the Moka Pot, we're going to boil our water in a separate pot, and then once it's at a rolling boil, pour into the lower chamber of the Moka Pot. Now pop the basket on top, pour in your coffee grounds and screw the top half in place. Light your stove again and set it around half intensity. Open the lid and keep an eye on the spout. Once the coffee begins bubbling through, turn the flame down and just feather it to ensure the water doesn't begin sputtering out the top and going everywhere. That should allow your coffee to brew nicely, and then once you've got enough coffee in place, you turn the stove off and the rest of the coffee should fill through. So we finished brewing with the Moka Pot, poured it into a cup here, and we're just going to do a little taste test. Mark that solid 7.5 out of 10. Really nice flavour on the coffee, brews really well, and you get a nice long brew with it. So it's a good one for the mornings, this. Next up, and arguably mine and Harry's favourite brewing method for coffee out and about, is the GSI Outdoors Mini Espresso 1 from GSI Outdoors. So this is essentially still a Moka Pot. It's just a slightly different format. So whereas the other Moka Pot had the spout on the inside of a main chamber, this one you get the little spout here and a tiny little cup. No, I mean, I am quite a large human, but no, I haven't grown even more. This is just a very small mug. And we're going to be teaming that up with also our favourite coffee out of the ones that we tried from Black Mountain Roast, which is the Bourbon Cedro, which is a Colombian coffee. This one is ground for a Moka Pot, and just the smell of this alone, we have already opened this because we've had a few coffees when we were testing it, playing around, is delicious. This is by far our favourite brewing method, so I'm really looking forward to this one. Because it's a Moka Pot, we're using exactly the same method as the previous Moka Pot that we used. It's just a smaller brew and we'll produce a smaller coffee at the end. So we add our grounds in to just below the fill line, fill with preheated water, and then pop it onto the stovetop to boil off and get our coffee out of it. Finished brewing our tiny little espresso. So you do get a very small amount of coffee with this, but let's give it a taste. For argument's sake, for me, that's as close to a 10 as I'm ever going to give a cup of coffee. That's absolutely delicious. This is also Harry's favourite coffee, so he's wincing a little bit that I'm drinking this because there's only a little espresso in here and he's not allowed any. Next up on our outdoor coffee adventure is pour over or filter coffee, depending on your exact terminology and your preference. Traditionally with filter coffee, you would use just that. You'd use a paper filter over an inverted dome. You put the coffee grounds onto the filter, pour water over the top, it then filters through to your mug underneath so that you then get a delicious cup of coffee. GSI with their coffee rocket, this thing here that is rattling around a little bit, which is going to be a little bit annoying for the microphone, is a slightly different approach to that. So instead of using a paper filter, they use a metal filter in the basket on the bottom here, which is a little bit better long term. It also means that you don't have to remember paper filters. It's also one less thing to worry about disposing of in the outdoors. You should always carry that waste out, but it's just one less thing to deal with. Now, other than that, it works essentially the same way as a standard pour over, but this is quite cool in the sense that it does collapse down and you can then store away a smaller unit inside. Won't quite fit in this mug, but you get the idea. It will store inside a mug, inside your stove, to make it a little bit more practical, a little bit easier to carry. It's also arguably the easiest brew method here, because once it's set up, you just pour water over it and you leave it alone. You don't have to run the stove constantly and monitor it to make sure it doesn't boil over or anything like that. So in combination with this, we are using Black Mountain Roast's Kenyan. After trying a few coffees, we decided that this was best for our filter coffee, our pour over method. And this one has been ground specifically for pour over. That is something that you can select your grind setting when you purchase your coffee through Black Mountain Roast. So depending on the coffee and style of drink that you're after, you can select different grind settings, from Moka right the way through to Espresso grind and cafetiere. So it'll go from a coarse grind right the way through to a very fine grind. And that's something that you can select for their coffees on their website, which is quite a nice thing, because it ensures that you get the ground coffee that you want for the coffee that you're trying to drink. We're going to fill the bottom chamber up with coffee just below the perforations, just to get a good dose of coffee in there. Screw the dome back on top and then place the rocket on top of our chosen cup and pour over a small amount of water to pre-infuse, just to soak up the grind a little bit. After that, we then allow more water to pass through, so we'll pour more water over, and that will then filter through into our mug and we'll have a delicious cup of coffee to drink. Coffee rocket's finished brewing, so now on to that taste test. It's also really nice. The Kenyan works really well in here. I would give that solid 7 out of 10. It's not my favourite out of all of these methods, but that is a coffee that I would happily drink. I normally prefer a very strong coffee. So that for me is a little bit more mellow, but that's perfectly drinkable if you stop in the middle of the day. It's also a really easy brew method. Moving away from GSI for a moment, we're going to actually go across to a product from Primus. There is also a very similar product that we stock from Jetboil that also does the same thing. And that is an add-on for an all-in-one style stove that turns it into a French press or a cafetiere. So a £15 roughly, give or take, accessory that is also collapsible, that fits inside your all-in-one pot, turning it into a cafetiere. So this is actually my personal coffee setup. This is what I normally take out and about until today, because it's an add-on for a stove that I already had. It's just a little extra that then effectively turns this into that cafetiere so that you can brew up a nice cup of coffee. It's also super simple, really hard to go wrong, and brews enough coffee for more than one person quite easily. We're teaming that with Black Mountain Roast Ethiopia blend. This has been ground quite coarsely because it is designed for a cafetiere. So this is a coarser grind setting than any of the other coffees that we've used, which again you can select if you go to Black Mountain Roast website. And what we're aiming for with this is roughly 70 grams of coffee per litre of water. So this is a 500ml pot, so I'm sure you can work that out. Your mileage may vary, you may prefer a slightly stronger or weaker brew, but that's something to aim for. Also, along with brewing times, this isn't going to be an exact science, because depending on how strong coffee you want, you may want to brew for longer or shorter periods of time, but that's how we're going to do it today. Pour in your water and set your stove on full power to boil the water. Once boiled, leave for a few moments before pouring in your coffee grounds. Insert the plunger in the top of the stove pot, push down slightly just to submerge the coffee, and leave it for around 4 minutes. Next, push the plunger down gently and pour out your fresh coffee. French press is now brewed up. Same as always, time for that taste test. Again, I'd say a solid 7 out of 10. It's good. The coffee holds up really nicely to it with that coarser grind and a slightly longer brewing method. We actually ended up about 5 minutes for this brew. It's a nice cup of coffee and super simple because it's, again, pretty hands-off. Now, there is one other type of coffee that we do have to bring up, and I'm going to say the word instant. That might seem like a little bit of a sin when you're talking to people who are really into their coffee, but just in the same way as supermarket ground coffee isn't going to be the best representative of ground coffee and whole bean in the sense of you don't know how fresh it is, the same goes for certain types of instant coffee that you get in the supermarket or elsewhere. Not all of them are created equal. So we bought this ourselves today. and this is from a company called True Start. So this is a premium instant coffee, which still has its place in the outdoors, especially if you don't want to bring along extra brewing methods. This is super lightweight, it's small, it's dead easy, because essentially all you're doing is boiling water, popping the instant coffee in, and away you go. So as far as brewing methods go, it's not going to stand up to a true cup of coffee in the sense that you're using fresh grounds or fresh beans, but not all instant is necessarily bad, but we're going to taste it and find out. Boil water, put coffee in, enjoy coffee. Okay, a little instant taste test, same as the others. Okay, if I was comparing this to other instant coffees, probably be about an 8 out of 10, because it's a good instant coffee. Based on the other coffees that we've tried today and rating them same across the board, I'm afraid to say it does get knocked down a few pegs because the flavour's just not there by comparison. It's arguably a 4, maybe a 4.5 at best for me. So hopefully that little rundown gives you the inspiration you need to start making better coffee outdoors. If you'd like to shop the entire range of the products that we've mentioned in this video and used, there will be a link on screen now to explore our coffee range a little bit further. We do have to say a big thank you and a big shout out to our friends over at Black Mountain Roast for providing coffee for today's video and taking the time out to show us around their facility and running through a little bit of a tasting. They have also given us a 10% code that you guys can use, which will be down in the link in the description. So if you'd like to buy any of their coffee, explore more of their range, our recommendation would be the Bourbon Cidra. That was our top recommendation there. If you'd like to explore more of their range, there will be a 10% link down in the description so that you can explore that a little bit more. I'm highly caffeinated now, so I'm probably gonna run up Hay Bluff or something. Harry's gonna have to catch me, and we will see you in the next one. Take care. Coffee is the foundation of life. I can't do this.
You can. I know you can.
Sake. Hello dear viewers, thank you for joining me. Sheep. Golf.